Meet Alex, a law-abiding citizen who uses medical marijuana legally in his state. Like many Americans, Alex relies on his prescription to manage chronic pain and improve his quality of life. He follows all the rules, visits his doctor regularly, and never uses marijuana outside the boundaries of state law. One day, Alex decides he wants to buy a handgun for home protection. He heads to a licensed gun store, ready to exercise his Second Amendment rights, and begins filling out the federal background check paperwork required for every firearm purchase. But then, he hits a roadblock. The form asks if he's an unlawful user of any controlled substance. Even though marijuana is legal in his state, it's still illegal under federal law. This single question puts Alex in a tough spot, forcing him to choose between his rights and following the law. If Alex answers yes, he's immediately denied the gun, no exceptions, no appeals. His status as a medical marijuana patient automatically disqualifies him from owning a firearm under federal rules. But if he answers no, he risks serious federal charges for lying on a government form, a felony offense that could ruin his life and land him in prison. This isn't just Alex's problem. Millions of Americans who use medical or even recreational marijuana legally in their states face the same impossible dilemma, caught in the crossfire between state and federal law. At the heart of the issue is Section 922G(3) of the Gun Control Act of 1968. This law was designed to keep guns away from people considered dangerous because of drug use, but it hasn't kept up with changing attitudes and laws about marijuana. Now, many argue that this outdated law unfairly targets responsible citizens who are simply following the rules in their own states, punishing them for choices that are legal where they live. The contradiction has sparked a wave of legal challenges across the country. People are fighting back, claiming their Second Amendment rights are being violated just because they use a state legal medicine. Now the Supreme Court is stepping in, hearing U.S. versus Hemani, a landmark case that could redefine not only gun rights and drug policy, but also what it means to be a law-abiding citizen in America today. The outcome of this case will impact not just Alex, but millions of Americans who are navigating the confusing and often contradictory gap between state and federal law. The stakes couldn't be higher, for individual rights, for public safety, and for the future of American law. The Supreme Court is set to decide a pivotal question. Does banning gun ownership for people who use drugs violate the Second Amendment? This case, U.S. versus Hemani, could have sweeping consequences for both gun rights and drug policy in America. The law at the center of the case, Section 922G(3), has for decades made it illegal for anyone who uses controlled substances to possess firearms. This includes not just users of hard drugs, but also people who use marijuana, even in states where it's legal under state law. But the legal landscape has shifted. Under the court's new history and tradition test for gun laws, the government now faces a higher bar. It must show that this kind of restriction is consistent with America's historical approach to regulating firearms, dating back to the nation's founding. If the court decides to strike down the law, millions of Americans, including those who use marijuana legally under state law, could suddenly gain the right to own guns. This would mark a dramatic shift, especially as more states move to legalize cannabis. On the other hand, if the law is upheld, the federal government will retain broad authority to restrict gun ownership in the name of public safety, even as state drug laws continue to evolve. The case brings together two of the most contentious debates in American society: gun rights and drug policy, forcing the justices to weigh individual freedoms against the government's responsibility to protect the public. Whatever the outcome, the justices' decision will set a powerful national precedent, clarifying how far individual liberty extends when it comes to guns and drugs, and how much power the government has to limit those rights. With state and federal laws increasingly at odds, the ruling will shape how courts and lawmakers across the country address the intersection of gun ownership and drug use for years to come. All eyes are on the Supreme Court as it prepares to resolve this historic conflict, one that could redefine rights and responsibilities for millions of Americans. The outcome of U.S. Survivor Hemani will echo far beyond the courtroom, shaping the nation's legal landscape and the daily lives of countless people. Ali Daniel Hemani is an ordinary Texas resident whose life has unexpectedly become the focus of a major legal battle. Living in a quiet neighborhood, Hemani never imagined he would be at the center of a case that could reshape constitutional law. Now his name is at the heart of a Supreme Court showdown that could impact the rights of millions of Americans. In 2023, FBI agents searched Hamani's home and discovered a pistol, along with small amounts of marijuana and cocaine. The search was part of a broader investigation, but Hamani was not accused of any violent crime or intent to harm. Instead, the charges focused solely on his possession of a firearm while allegedly using controlled substances, a federal offense, even without evidence of violence or threats. Hamani's defense team argued that this law unfairly targeted non-violent individuals and violated his Second Amendment rights. They emphasized that there was no proof Hamani posed any danger to the public or himself. A federal judge agreed, ruling that there was no historical precedent for disarming otherwise law-abiding, sober citizens based solely on drug use. The charges were dismissed, marking a significant legal victory for Hamani. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld this decision, clarifying that only those who are actively intoxicated might be subject to such restrictions, not those who simply use drugs, at some point. The government, however, disagreed and appealed the case, bringing it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now the nation's highest court will decide where the line should be drawn. Although there are unrelated allegations against Hamani, the Supreme Court is focusing strictly on the constitutional question of gun rights and drug use. Hamani's case now stands as a national test. Can the government take away a fundamental constitutional right based solely on drug use, even if there's no evidence of violence or danger? The Supreme Court's answer will set a precedent with sweeping consequences for civil liberties, gun ownership, and the limits of government power in America. The Department of Justice insists the federal ban is vital for public safety. They argue drug users are at higher risk for impaired judgment and violence, making gun ownership dangerous. The DOJ points to historical laws disarming those deemed dangerous, like drunkards, as precedent. They stress the ban is temporary. Rights are restored if drug use stops, unlike lifelong bans for felons. The government warns that overturning the law could undermine federal drug policy and public safety. High-profile cases, like Hunter Biden's conviction, are cited as proof of the law's necessity. The DOJ maintains drug use and guns are a risky mix, and the ban is a reasonable constitutional safeguard. The Supreme Court must weigh these arguments against evolving social norms. Before the Supreme Court stepped in, lower courts were deeply divided. The 5th, 10th, and 11th Circuits ruled the federal ban unconstitutional for some drug users, citing a lack of historical support. Other circuits upheld the ban, arguing it's a reasonable public safety measure. This circuit split created a patchwork of rules. Gun rights for drug users depended on where you lived. The Supreme Court's job resolved this conflict and set a single, nationwide standard. Their decision will replace the confusion with a clear precedent for all Americans. The stakes equal justice and clarity on a fundamental constitutional right. As states legalize marijuana, millions use it lawfully under state law, but remain unlawful users federally. The ATF warns state legal marijuana users can't buy guns under federal law. This puts citizens in a bind, forced to choose between state rights and federal law. Some states are pushing back, introducing bills to protect gun rights for marijuana users. State leaders argue it's unfair to make citizens pick between legal cannabis and the Second Amendment. Congress has yet to resolve the conflict, leaving millions in limbo. The Supreme Court's ruling in Hamani could tip the balance, either ending the conflict or reinforcing federal authority. The decision will shape the future of state-federal relations in the era of cannabis legalization. The outcome will be pivotal for both gun owners and marijuana users. The Supreme Court will hear arguments in early 2026, with a decision expected by summer. If the ban is struck down, millions of state-legal marijuana users could gain gun rights, forcing changes to federal background checks. A narrow ruling might only protect non-dangerous state-legal users. If the ban is upheld, the status quo remains. State-legal users must still choose between guns and cannabis. The decision will define who is a law-abiding citizen in modern America. Whatever the outcome, Hamani will be a landmark case, shaping debates on guns, drugs, and freedom for years. The ruling will spark new legal and political battles, redrawing the lines of American rights. The nation waits for an answer that could change everything.